that he was about 6 feet tall, that he was completely scourged all over his body, he was crucified.
For centuries, a silent gap in the story of Jesus has raised questions, and now ancient Ethiopian texts are pulling that mystery back into the spotlight. Between Jesus' childhood and his public ministry, the Gospels leave a long stretch unexplained. Over time, ancient Ethiopian Christian texts have offered reflections that some believe shed light on that gap. Today, we're exploring what these writings really say, why they were preserved, and how voices like Mel Gibson's have brought new attention to them. Stay with us as we explore more forgotten texts, hidden histories, and the questions scholars are still debating. The silent years that puzzled readers. From the earliest centuries of Christianity, readers noticed something unusual in the Gospel accounts. The story of Jesus moves quickly from his birth to a brief childhood scene, and then suddenly jumps forward to his public ministry. This long gap, covering many formative years, stands out precisely because of how detailed the rest of the narrative feels. The silence does not feel accidental to many readers, but it still invites curiosity. Early Christian teachers were aware of this gap and discussed it openly. They understood that the Gospel writers were not aiming to create modern biographies. Their focus remained on teachings, miracles, and events that shaped faith rather than daily life. Even so, believers across different regions wondered what those unseen years might have looked like and how they shaped Jesus' later mission. As Christianity spread, questions about these years became part of the oral tradition. Stories circulated quietly among communities, not as official doctrine, but as reflections meant to inspire faith and devotion. These accounts often emphasized wisdom, discipline, and spiritual growth rather than historical detail. Over time, some of these reflections were written down. This long history of curiosity helps explain why later texts exist at all. They were not written to challenge the Gospels, but to explore unanswered questions in ways that felt meaningful to believers seeking deeper understanding. Ethiopia's unique Christian tradition. Christianity reached Ethiopia very early, likely through trade routes connecting Africa and the Middle East. From the beginning, Ethiopian Christianity developed independently, shaped by its own culture, language, and religious rhythm. This independence allowed the faith to grow without the pressures that later shaped European Christianity. The Ethiopian Church preserved its scriptures in Ge'ez, an ancient language used almost entirely for religious purposes. Monks dedicated their lives to copying manuscripts by hand, often working in remote monasteries far from political centers. These manuscripts were treated as sacred objects, preserved with care and discipline. Unlike Western churches, Ethiopia maintained a broader biblical canon. Certain texts remained part of Scripture because they had always been read, taught, and trusted within the community. These choices were not reactions to Western decisions, but reflections of long-standing tradition. This continuity explains why Ethiopian manuscripts feel ancient and untouched. Their survival tells a story of preservation rather than discovery, showing how faith can endure quietly without global attention. What people mean by a newly found gospel. The phrase, newly found gospel, often creates confusion. In reality, most Ethiopian texts being discussed today were never lost within Ethiopia. They were read, copied, and preserved for generations without interruption. What changed was exposure. As scholars began translating Ge'ez texts and digital archives expanded. These writings became accessible to a global audience. This sudden visibility created the impression of discovery, even though the texts themselves were not new. Online platforms amplified this misunderstanding. Headlines favored dramatic language, and phrases like newly found attract curiosity. Context often disappears in the process, replaced by mystery-driven narratives. Understanding this difference matters. These texts deserve attention for what they reveal about faith and history, not because they overturn established scripture. Do Ethiopian texts describe a lost year of Jesus? Some Ethiopian writings reflect deeply on Jesus' early life, but they do so through theological exploration rather than historical reporting. They focus on wisdom, obedience, and spiritual maturity rather than specific events tied to dates or locations. Readers unfamiliar with this style sometimes interpret these reflections as literal history. When removed from their religious framework, symbolic passages can appear factual, leading to claims about a documented missing year. Scholars generally agree that these texts were never intended to serve as biographies. Their purpose centers on teaching and devotion, offering insight into how early believers understood Jesus' nature and mission. Recognizing this intent helps keep interpretation grounded. The value of these writings lies in meaning rather than measurement. Why these texts were not included in Western Bibles. The formation of the biblical canon was a gradual process shaped by time, geography, and leadership. Different communities evaluated texts based on usage, theology, and perceived authority. There was no single moment when all decisions were finalized. Western churches eventually agreed on a collection of books believed to trace directly to apostolic witnesses. Other writings remained respected, but were not included in the official canon. Ethiopia followed a parallel path rather than a competing one. Its canon developed through continuity rather than councils, guided by local tradition and long-standing use. These differences reflect diversity, not division. They show how faith communities preserved what mattered most to them within their historical content. Gibson and his interest in ancient Christianity. Mel Gibson has spoken openly about his interest in early Christianity and ancient religious traditions. His faith influences his creative work, especially projects that explore suffering, redemption, and sacrifice. When referencing non-canonical texts, Gibson approaches them as sources of reflection rather than evidence. He acknowledges their symbolic and spiritual value without presenting them as historical proof. Media coverage sometimes amplifies his words beyond their original intent. Thoughtful comments become framed as revelations, fueling speculation. Understanding this distinction helps viewers separate personal belief from academic scholarship. How? Rumors form around faith and history. Religious history carries deep significance for many people and can evoke strong emotional responses. When previously unknown or rarely discussed ancient texts become publicly accessible, they often attract intense interest from both scholars and the general public. People are naturally curious about the past, and the discovery of historical or religious documents can inspire excitement, wonder, and even hope. This attention can sometimes amplify interest beyond what the original texts explicitly state, as audiences try to connect these findings to broader historical or spiritual narratives. Short clips, Social media posts and simplified news stories frequently present these discoveries in condensed or highly edited forms. Complex historical and theological details are often omitted in favor of attention-grabbing headlines or visuals. As a result, audiences may only encounter fragments of the information and may not have the context needed to understand the full meaning or significance of the texts. The lack of detailed explanation can lead to incomplete impressions and a reliance on surface-level interpretations. As these stories circulate, people begin to form interpretations based on the information they receive, and these interpretations can solidify over time. Speculative claims and preliminary conclusions are often repeated, gradually taking on the appearance of established fact. When multiple sources share similar narratives, the public can accept these ideas as authoritative, even if scholarly consensus has not been reached. The repetition of these simplified stories contributes to the creation of collective assumptions that may differ from the original historical evidence. Understanding how rumors and simplified narratives develop can help audiences engage with religious and historical topics more critically. By acknowledging the tendency for speculation to spread quickly and the influence of fragmented information, people can approach such subjects with greater care and attention to context. Being aware of this process encourages thoughtful consideration of sources, encourages verification with credible scholarship, and allows readers and viewers to distinguish between established knowledge and emerging hypotheses. This awareness supports a more informed and measured engagement with complex historical material. What scholars actually agree on. Scholars studying Ethiopian manuscripts widely acknowledge their authenticity within the context of Ethiopian religious and literary tradition. These texts have been preserved over centuries, often meticulously copied and maintained by monastic communities. Linguistic analysis, historical cross-referencing, and carbon dating have provided strong evidence for the age and provenance of these manuscripts. The careful attention given to their preservation allows researchers to trace both the textual evolution and the cultural significance of these writings within Ethiopia, highlighting a long-standing commitment to maintaining a written record of spiritual and historical knowledge. At the same time, scholars emphasize that these Ethiopian manuscripts are not equivalent to the canonical Gospels of the New Testament. Their literary forms, narrative purposes, and theological emphases differ significantly from texts like Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. While the canonical Gospels focus on the life, ministry, death, and resurrection of Jesus in a particular historical and theological framework, Ethiopian texts often include additional teachings, visions, or genealogical details that reflect local religious interpretation and community priorities. Recognizing these differences is essential for understanding the manuscripts on their own terms, rather than as supplements to the widely recognized biblical canon. Another point of consensus among scholars is that there is no evidence in Ethiopian writings for a so-called lost year of Jesus that has been historically documented or verified. While some modern theories and popular accounts have suggested that these manuscripts might reveal previously unknown events in Jesus' life, rigorous academic examination does not support these claims. Researchers carefully distinguish between imaginative interpretations or speculative reconstructions and the actual content of the texts themselves. This distinction helps prevent the conflation of scholarly evidence with conjecture or popular storytelling. Despite these limitations, Scholarly agreement on the nature and authenticity of Ethiopian manuscripts offers clarity while leaving room for informed discussion. Understanding what the texts do and do not contain allows for respectful exploration of their cultural, historical, and theological significance. It encourages both scholars and the interested public to engage with these manuscripts thoughtfully, acknowledging their value within Ethiopian Christianity while maintaining accuracy regarding their relationship to broader biblical traditions. This approach fosters a careful, measured dialogue rather than sensationalized claims, supporting ongoing research and appreciation of these ancient writings. Why people feel drawn to the lost years. Idea: gaps in Huar. Historical narratives naturally invite human curiosity and imagination. When historical texts or religious accounts leave certain periods unrecorded, people often feel compelled to fill in the blanks, imagining what may have happened during those unaccounted years. These silences can be both frustrating and intriguing, prompting questions about character development, personal growth, and untold experiences. The unknown invites creative interpretation, and readers or believers often project their own ideas of moral lessons, challenges, or spiritual experiences onto these unrecorded periods. Silence in historical or religious narratives encourages reflection on the deeper implications of life and growth. When certain details are not specified, audiences are left to ponder the meaning behind those gaps, considering how they might relate to broader themes of maturity, preparation, or divine guidance. This process can lead to personal reflection, where individuals relate the ideas to their own lives and experiences. By thinking about what might have occurred, people engage in active contemplation rather than passive reading, which deepens their connection to the narrative. The concept of hidden years often resonates because it touches on universal curiosity about human development. Just as people are fascinated by the unknown paths of extraordinary figures in history, they are drawn to ideas about how spiritual or historical figures spent time learning, preparing, and transforming before major milestones in their lives. The lost years of Jesus, for example, spark questions about education, travel, mentorship, or spiritual experiences, reflecting a natural interest in understanding the full journey of someone considered exceptional. Different cultures have long expressed this curiosity through storytelling, using myths, legends, or supplementary writings to explore unrecorded periods in the lives of significant figures. From apocryphal tales to folklore, communities have historically sought to imagine what might have happened in the gaps of official narratives. These stories often serve cultural, moral, or educational purposes, helping communities convey values, reinforce identity, or explore spiritual lessons. The attraction to these narratives is therefore less about uncovering historical fact and more about engaging with human imagination and the cultural significance of storytelling. Faith, symbolism, and storytelling. Religious texts frequently communicate meaning through symbolism rather than strict chronological events. Symbols allow teachings to convey complex ideas, ethical guidance, and spiritual truths in ways that transcend literal historical detail. Through parables, metaphors, and allegorical accounts, these texts encourage readers to focus on the lessons and insights they offer, rather than the precise timing or sequence of events. Symbolism provides a means of conveying universal truths that remain relevant across different cultures and historical periods. Stories in religious texts often aim to teach values that history alone cannot convey. While historical records provide context and facts, narrative symbolism allows communities to reflect on ethical, moral, and spiritual questions in ways that mere chronology cannot. The focus is on meaning, guidance, and reflection rather than verifiable events. By framing experiences and teachings in narrative form, texts can inspire behavior, cultivate faith, and guide moral understanding, making the stories relevant to generations far removed from their original context. Ethiopian writings, including apocryphal gospels and other religious manuscripts, follow this symbolic tradition closely. These texts often present events, visions, and teachings in a way that emphasizes spiritual insight over historical detail. Understanding the symbolic nature of these writings allows scholars and readers to appreciate their cultural, theological, and moral significance without misinterpreting them as direct historical accounts. This approach preserves the richness of the texts while maintaining critical awareness of their purpose and context. Recognizing the symbolic nature of religious storytelling is crucial to preventing misinterpretation. When symbolic narratives are read as literal history, readers may form inaccurate assumptions or expect historical verification where none exists. By approaching these texts with an awareness of their narrative and symbolic strategies, audiences can appreciate both the faith traditions they represent and the lessons they intend to impart. This perspective encourages thoughtful engagement with religious texts, combining respect for their spiritual significance with careful scholarly understanding. How modern media shapes ancient narratives. Modern digital platforms are designed to reward content that captures attention quickly, often prioritizing dramatic or emotionally charged framing. Algorithms tend to favor posts, videos, or articles that generate rapid engagement through clicks, shares, and comments. As a result, creators are incentivized to present information in ways that emphasize tension, surprise, or conflict, even when dealing with historical or religious material. This dynamic shapes how audiences encounter knowledge, making vivid or sensational interpretations more visible than measured, nuanced accounts. When presenting ancient texts, this emphasis on engagement often leads to simplification. Complex narratives, layered meanings, and subtle theological or historical details are frequently condensed into short clips, headlines, or summaries that can be consumed rapidly. While simplification makes content more accessible to broad audiences, it can also strip away essential context and nuance. As a result, viewers may receive fragments of information that are compelling but incomplete, creating the risk of misunderstanding the true nature of the texts. Creators, therefore, operate under significant pressure to entertain while informing. Producing content that captures attention within seconds often conflicts with the time needed for careful analysis or explanation. This tension is especially pronounced when dealing with religious or historical manuscripts, which require careful interpretation to preserve their meaning. Content creators must balance the need for immediate engagement with the responsibility to present information accurately, a challenge that demands both creativity and ethical awareness. Responsible storytelling addresses this challenge by finding ways to maintain audience interest without compromising accuracy. Thoughtful creators prioritize clarity, context, and transparency, ensuring that viewers understand when interpretations are speculative or symbolic rather than factual. They may use engaging visuals, narrative hooks, or concise explanations, while clearly distinguishing between historical evidence and imaginative reconstruction. This approach allows audiences to enjoy compelling content while still respecting the integrity of the original texts, fostering informed curiosity rather than sensationalized misunderstanding, where curiosity meets responsibility. Curiosity is one of the most fundamental drivers of human exploration and learning. It compels individuals to ask questions, seek out new information, and engage with ideas that might otherwise remain unexplored. In the context of history, religion, or any field of knowledge, curiosity motivates people to investigate texts, traditions, and discoveries, allowing them to uncover layers of meaning that might be hidden at first glance. Without this innate desire to understand, much of human progress, including scholarship, storytelling, and innovation, would stall, leaving important questions unexamined and insights undiscovered. Responsibility plays a crucial role in protecting truth during the pursuit of knowledge. While curiosity encourages exploration, responsible engagement ensures that findings are evaluated carefully, sources are verified, and interpretations are grounded in evidence. This principle is particularly important in the study of ancient texts, historical documents, and religious writings, where misrepresentation or careless claims can easily spread misinformation. Responsibility acts as a safeguard, ensuring that the pursuit of understanding does not compromise accuracy or mislead audiences, and helps maintain the integrity of both scholarship and communication. Questions are the lifeblood of meaningful conversation, keeping discussions dynamic and evolving. By asking thoughtful and open-ended questions, individuals invite multiple perspectives and deeper reflection, fostering dialogue that extends beyond surface-level engagement. In educational, scholarly, or faith-based contexts, questions allow audiences to examine assumptions, challenge interpretations, and consider alternative explanations. This ongoing inquiry sustains intellectual curiosity, encourages critical thinking, and allows communities to explore ideas collectively, rather than accepting incomplete or simplified narratives at face value. Balance between curiosity, responsibility, and dialogue is essential to building trust. When exploration is guided by ethical standards, careful evaluation, and openness to questioning, audiences feel confident that information is both engaging and reliable. This balance allows learners, readers, and viewers to approach complex topics with interest and discernment, knowing that curiosity is supported by accountability and reflection. Trust emerges naturally when curiosity is tempered with responsibility and inquiry, creating a space where exploration enriches understanding rather than distorting it. The idea of a lost year of Jesus continues to spark curiosity, but the real story lies in how faith, tradition, and history intersect across cultures. Ethiopian texts offer reflection rather than revelation, and voices like Mel Gibson's invite conversation rather than certainty. So, what do you think? Do these ancient traditions deepen your understanding of history, or do they raise more questions than answers? Share your thoughts in the comments and join the discussion.